Modern will become vintage one day. Welcome to the Solemn Yu-Gi-Oh channel where we discuss everything collecting and investing in Yu-Gi-Oh! So, I hear this fallacy very often. The idea that, well, 18 years ago, those products, the LOB, the MRD, all of these beautiful vintage cards, were actually modern for their time. They were modern back then, and so many years down the line, they are now vintage. So in the same way, today I buy Genesis Impact, it's currently modern, but 18 years from now, that will be vintage. And therefore, it will grow just like all of these other beautiful boxes did before. Now, if you've watched every video on this channel since September, you can click off the video, because you already know what's coming. But I do not believe that. I do not believe today's modern will become vintage. There's a few factors for this. First of all, once again, we go back to our kids. Kids destroyed all the shit back in the day. LOB, MRL, and so forth. All of those cards get destroyed by little Timmy with the rubber bands in the shoebox, in his backpack, falling in the mud, falling in the sea. Cards get destroyed. Cards in pants, go into the dishwasher or going to the washer, whatever. Destroyed. All your cards got fucked. Natural attrition on top of that, most cards are now destroyed. And the current population of people who collect Yu-Gi-Oh! And play Yu-Gi-Oh! Are mostly adults and they protect their cards. And you also have your speculators already who are sitting on these boxes thinking that they will appreciate, which means you have way more of these boxes being kept in great condition. So once the market does go up, and we don't know if it will, but as it goes up, potentially more supply will be able to hit the market. If a certain box goes 5x in value, you will have plenty of paper hands who are suddenly going, oh, 5x, great, and throw their boxes online, ready to sell. And so the population is very hard to drain. Now, we've already discussed this on the channel very often, but there is one more angle I want to give you by going to some really solid examples. Because, you know, it's very easy for me to say, oh, kids this, and people hoarding already that, speculative, whatever the hell. But you don't even need to take my word for it. You can take the sports cards industry's word for it. You have vintage sports cards from before the 1950s and so forth, these beautiful cards, and oh, maybe from the 1970s this, and there's a variety of amazingly expensive, wanted, coveted, truly rare sports cards. And so what happened was in the 90s, people thought, oh, all of these sports cards went up so much, and today's modern is 20 years from now is vintage, right? So our cards now, I'm in the 92s, I'm currently listening to, what did people listen to back then? NSYNC? I don't know. All of the cards you thought, wow, today they're modern, but in some years they'll be vintage, oh. And so people started speculating on these. And the companies noticed, oh, little Timmy over there wants to buy 1,000 boxes because he thinks they'll appreciate, like the cards from the 1950s. That's cute. Timmy, we can give you 1,000 boxes. Yeah, of course. Oh, will they grow? Maybe. And they just printed and printed and printed and printed. And little Timmy made his own LLC or whatever it was called back then, his own cardboard empire. He stacked and stacked and stacked these beautiful packs from back then, the 90s, modern back then, but it's gonna be vintage, just like my other cards from the 1950s, 60s, 70s. It's gonna be great. I'm gonna stack all of these, and in 20 years, the kids are gonna have grown up, they're gonna want these cards, they're gonna covet them. Wow, what happened? That entire industry went bust, crashed down, and most cards from that era today are worth as much as they were back then, or less. Because modern does not become vintage when people assume that modern will become vintage. They were being saved, they were being mass produced way more to meet that demand. Those speculators were keeping them and hoarding them, and oh, it's gonna be just like that. And because those people exist, it was not just like that. You can say, oh, but that's just one time and that's different. You know, sports cards were so big, they were way more produced. It's gonna be different. Okay, fine. There's some more stuff like this that happened. Comic books went through this cycle. Beanie Babies. I know that's a funny one because everyone thinks everything's a Beanie Baby. That's not true. But still, you know, people were hoarding them. A lot of Beanie Babies, except for, you know, a very few, never recovered. So once you create a market of collectors and speculators around something, and vintage already exists, and then that modern is gonna become vintage just because of age, that isn't true. Age by itself will not increase value on product as much as you would like it. If that was true, again, I would gladly hoard Genesis Impact and all of these other boxes and Blazing Vortex. Oh, I'm gonna hoard all the Blazing Vortex here in my smog cave. I have enough room. You know, I've got the cash as well if I want to buy all of that. But I just don't see that happening because, you know, we look at history, a lot of collectible classes like that. You know, they have their golden period, the actual firsts. You know, you go for the things that were actually first. And then after that, you have, you know, a few more cool opportunities. If you look at a Pokemon, for example, it's not just base. There's some cool stuff after that, EX and so forth. And in Yu-Gi-Oh, you know, you have your GX and maybe your Ghost Rares. But very often in all of these other collectible classes, after that, you know, your Golden Age and whatever that came right after, you have this euphoria where everyone thinks, oh, one day these cards too will see that same growth. And time again, it just doesn't play out that way. So in my opinion, no. Today's modern will not one day be vintage. And I would be very, very careful speculating on the fact that it will. Hope you found this interesting. Be sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you soon. Ciao.